Hello, comic creators. Welcome back to the Comics Connection podcast, the podcast where we talk to you about the business and creative sides of being a professional comic book creator and publisher. I'm Gamal. He's Andy, and today we are talking about the future. Well, we're not actually talking about the future. We're really talking about the present, but how it's going to impact the future because we are talking about artificial intelligence in comics, which is a subject that everyone agrees completely on and no one has any problems with at all, ever. So we don't really have that much to talk about, but we're going to try to squeeze out an episode anyway. Andy, what I wanted to touch on today was basically a new option in the discussion that's been going on, because from what I've seen online, and I'm sure what you've seen online, there are basically two camps. There are the people who think AI is the worst thing ever because it's going to take their jobs, take their artwork, not pay them for it, and leave them destitute and homeless out in the street. And there's the other side that says AI is great because now it allows them the opportunity to create things that they would otherwise never have the opportunity to create. Is that accurate so far?
That sounds pretty good. Yeah.
Okay. What I am proposing, the idea, the thought experiment that I wanted to walk through with you, because you have a unique dual perspective on this, is the idea of a AI license. Um, to put it in a nutshell, the problem with AI now is that it is using many of the large language models are using copyrighted materials without paying a royalty or any kind of payment for the use of that material. It's just scraping it off the internet, putting it in the system, and then, using it to create whatever the system is designed to create. But in music, there are things called royalties. If your song gets played on the radio or in a bar or anything else, there are systems in place, ASCAP, BMI, to give you money every time that's played. Now, when things like the radio was a much bigger thing, musicians can make an entire career purely on radio airplay, purely on having their music played out in ways that are less viable today because of the descent of radio. But even systems like Spotify allow there to be royalties per play for music, so that in theory artists are being paid. In reality, for Spotify, artists not getting paid, but that's a separate issue. It's the same concept when you're talking about what's called name, image, and likeness rights. If you're, let's say there was a system, I don't know how the system is set up today, but there used to be a system in commercials that if you appeared in a commercial, every time that commercial got shown anywhere, you got paid. There was a small amount of money, but since the commercials were being played over and over and over again, you can make a decent living being an actor in commercials. What I am proposing, and this is not an original idea, other people have been proposing this and are working on these systems right now, is to create large language models that only contain material that creators have actually put into the system and opted into in exchange for being paid when those materials are used to create work. So, with that long kind of preamble, Andy, you are both a writer and a publisher. So, I wanted to ask you these questions from both of those standpoints as separate questions. As a writer who has written for comics of all types, including freelance and creator owned stuff, how would you feel about putting your writing, your new stuff, into these models, knowing that there could be an opportunity, depending on how the systems are used, for you to be paid for that work, even though it's not new work. You're just simply being paid for it over and over again for work you already did.
Well, I kind of feel as a creator, some of the to me there are two issues with what you're proposing that I think are tough to solve. but I think one of them is the ability to opt in or out.
Mhm.
I think it would have to be an opt in system where I have to proactively
Yes.
into it,
Mhm.
right? There's no assume that you're opt in but you opt out thing.
Mhm.
That's number one, giving creators, and actually I'll say this more carefully, not just creators, but giving, I guess, the owners of content.
Yes.
And that's where this gets dicey though, because I have written a bunch of comics that are mine that I own, but I've also written a whole bunch of comics that are I did work made for hire, and they are owned outright by other entities,
Mhm.
right? By DC, Boom, whomever. So as a creator, I wouldn't want those entities to be able to submit my content
Mhm.
without me signing off on it. I don't think there's any legal argument. There's no one that comes to mind. Then again, I'm not an attorney where I could prevent them from doing that. But the reason why I feel like that is a particularly more difficult problem with AI is because the end result isn't I drew a picture of Deadpool or I wrote this line of dialogue and that line of dialogue or that picture of Deadpool shows up here where
Mhm.
Marvel said you can use this content, just pay me a royalty. That's not what AI does. AI will look at that content and try and determine your style,
Mhm.
your that, and then create something new and that hasn't previously existed in that form. And that I think gets dicey because sure, Marvel, DC, whomever may own that content that they submitted, but it's using that content to get at who I am.
Mhm.
And so that is a problem. I would ethically speaking and sort of functionally, I don't think an entity with the copyright should be the copyright holder should not be the only party that gets a say. Like ultimately, the creators involved should have to opt in and sign off on it. So like, if Marvel wanted to use my X-Men story and submit that as something AI could use and generate a royalty, I would have to opt in for it. Marvel could come to me and say, we want to use this. We want you to opt in, and this is how you get paid for it, or not, because they may not want to pay me for it, and they'd have to go to the artists as well,
Mhm.
which is arduous for them. But I think that's the only way that makes sense because otherwise, I don't really have a say, right? Like I could say no, I don't opt in for all the stuff I own, but
Right.
more than half of what I've produced has been, work for hire. So if they all opt in and I said no, then I've opted in because they're trying to determine my style. The AI determines my style, not the work that it's not a derivative work per se. So I
Well,
think that gets really dicey because it is generating something that hasn't existed before.
mhm.
Uh, so yeah, the only way I could see that working is the creators ethically working, which let's be fair, rarely is that how things work in the real world. Is if the creators of the content have to opt in, even if they no longer hold the copyright for the material.
Okay, I think you are bringing up several very salient points that I think we should unpack separately because there's the easy one is the creator owned stuff that any individual creator owns. If they opt into the system because they're getting paid, then it's not necessarily an issue and we can move on. If it's a freelance situation like the work you did for X-Men or Crime Syndicate or the many other books that you've done, then there's two pieces there. There's the actual work that you did, which according to the work for hire agreement that I know that you signed, that does not actually belong to you. That belongs to Disney or Discovery. And therefore, I can easily say, from a not from an ethical standpoint, from a legal standpoint, you wouldn't be getting paid for that. But your style which is something that the large language models can actually pull out from their the information that they're digesting, is not your copyright. That's your what's called your name, image, likeness rights. Those are your, well, let me go back a step. Styles by definition are not protected by copyright or trademark or anything else. Um it There is an argument for what's called right of privacy, right of publicity, so that you, if the system spits out something based on the creations of Andy Schmidt, then because it's using Andy Schmidt, you should be getting paid for that, regardless of who actually owns the copyright. The problem that you've also articulated is that a lot of the systems now, which are based on a what I believe is a flawed concept of fair use, does not actually list out where the sources of the final result came from. So if I put in, give me a script about a, teenage vigilante, it will pull from whatever books it pulled from and never tell me where it got it from. But in the licensed AI models, there is a second component, which is a list of sources. The sources is everything that the system used to pull out that result. If you have a list of sources, you by definition have something that you could use to say, okay, these are all the people that contributed to this result. These are all the people that get paid for it. So you could, for let's take your X-Men script as an example. If they were producing an X-Men script and they used your script as among many others, but not necessarily looking at your style, then you would not be paid for that. But if they were looking for a X-Men comic in the style of Andy Schmidt or any comic in the style of Andy Schmidt, and those books came out, then you would be getting paid for that. Does any of that make sense?
It makes sense. I don't see it happening. The I don't know what the term is. It's not open source, right? But like the idea of listing your sources, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think in order for the licensing to work, that would have to happen.
Right.
Like currently, it doesn't
Mm-hmm.
anywhere that I know of. But yeah, so so the idea of that those works and the creators behind those works being listed, and then there being a royalty. Let's just say it's 10% for ease of math. And I don't know, like, which only applies to certain types of things anyway. But let's just say it's a royalty of $100, right?
Mm-hmm.
That $100 gets split up amongst whomever's work is used. Presumably, if there are 10 people, everybody gets $10,
Right.
right? Um, if it's only one person's work being used, then they would get all the $100. Like
Right.
that makes sense as long as the creators themselves get to determine the deal,
Mm-hmm.
and whether or not they want to be in a part of it. The problem, I think, is still in those cases we were just talking about. Like, there's no way that these large corporations, if they want to get a piece of this licensing AI money, there's no way they're going to come to the creators and see who wants in and make sure that they get paid their royalty as well, because there's no incentive for them to do it.
Right.
There's only a downside for those companies to come to the creator and say, will you opt in? Because either you say yes, which is what they would do without consulting you,
Mm-hmm.
or you're going to say no, which is not what they want to hear. So those places are going to fight to not have to go talk to the creators, and they're going to have high-powered lawyers, and they're going to lobby Congress, and Congress pass a law, and the creators are going to get screwed. But maybe I'm just a pessimist when it comes to this. Maybe there is a model, but considering the example you use, the music industry, and that example ends with, even though all the paperwork is there and they're supposed to get money for this, they don't really get money, right? The money is so small that it is inconsequential.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so, like, even in that case that you bring up as an example of, like, see, this is how it can be done, it doesn't actually work the way it's supposed to. And I think that's where a lot of my hesitation on move would be on trying to move forward with this.
Mhm.
Um, that said, is that better than the alternative, which is not be involved in the conversation and then only let the big corporations make the decisions? I Yeah, I don't know. I kind of just wind up going in circles. But every time I think, oh, there's an ethical way to do this, it winds up getting messier.
Yes. Yes. And I think for the when we're talking about which systems would actually work for the creators, and we're sticking with creators until I move on to the next segment of the show. For this to work for the creators, it would have to be, I believe, just from a practical standpoint, it would have to be something that's based on creator owned work or independent work. Because as you have correctly articulated, if it's part of a freelance thing, which means basically all the comics between 1939 and right now that have come out from the large corporations, and any company, any publisher that got you to sign a work for hire deal and didn't have AI carve outs in the contract. And there are some publishers who are putting AI carve outs in the contract so that the creators still retain those rights, but that's not most of them. The vast majority of them do not have those carve outs. Um, it would have to be the kind of thing where, as of January 1st, 2026, if you had a creator owned deal, or if you had if you put out a book independently, then you opt into the system and then you can get paid. If it was a freelance deal, then just like any other aspect of a freelance deal, you took the money up front and now you're not getting paid. That would be the practical and most likely way that piece would shake out. Um, but there's, like you correctly pointed out, there's two major hurdles in getting a system like this to work. One is the technical issue of you have to create a system that actually lists all the sources. Otherwise, nobody gets paid because no one knows where stuff came from. And second, you would have to make the royalty system such that it is not fractions of a penny per use, because then nobody gets paid, even though theoretically some money is getting, you know, pushed in your direction. The system that I am advocating for is something that allows creators to get something close, much far closer to a livable wage than what they are working with now, based on stuff that they have actually created. So if we incentivize people to have creator owned books or to have independent books, because they know not only can they sell those books, they can opt into a system that allows them to get royalties based on AI use, then you're talking about something that more creative people get more money. But you have to deal with the legal standpoint, you have to deal with the technical standpoint. So it is not a layup by any stretch of the imagination. But the other piece of it that I wanted to talk to you about is from the standpoint of a publisher, because you run CEX Publishing. If you knew that there was a system where you could legally, and there was no question about the legality of you using this system to create books, and you got a script, let's say, that you thought was a good script, you knew the artist you wanted to work with, but you knew that that artist was either A, not available, or B, not alive anymore. But if you use this system, artists would be paid, and you knew artists would get paid. How would you feel about utilizing that system as a publisher as opposed to a writer?
Well, I think I'd feel similarly, right? Like, I mean, well, first of all, most of what we publish is creator owned
Mm-hmm.
work. So, like, and our contracts have standard language that we don't allow for AI scraping. We can't prevent it
Mm-hmm.
from
Mm-hmm.
but we don't give permission away for that, and we won't use your work in AI. We also have a clause in there that where a creator has to basically disclose that if they used AI, and that is at this point a disqualifying attribute, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
publish it. But if the system were such that the publisher got paid and the creators got paid, then I, and if the creators are all for it of a particular project, then I'd probably be pretty open to it. Um, but if it were a thing where, well, I own the copyright, I can just opt in. I think I'd feel just morally, if not legally, but morally obligated to go and talk to the creators. Which, like I said, if you're a smaller publisher, you can do that. I could probably put together one email
Mm-hmm.
that went out to all my creators and said, "Here's an opportunity for you. If you want it, we'll do it. And here's where you sign up. Here's how you opt in. When we put in a project, we have to say who does everything. Probably they get some sort of identification number or something that you put in, which is actually a fair amount of work to even get the stuff submitted. But I don't know how else you do it that would work. The other thing that occurred to me was sort of like weighting the use on something,
Mm-hmm.
because if you're a really famous popular comic, I'll use art because it's a little easier, artist, somebody like Alex Ross,
Mm-hmm.
sure, their name will probably get used a lot more than most other people's names, so there'd be like more money coming in just because it's used all the time
Right.
if they opt in. But a lot of the prompts are written like in the style of Alex Ross, but like I want this one out of 20 characters to look kind of the way Frank Frazetta would draw.
Right.
And so like it's 90% Alex Ross, 10% Frank Frazetta. I don't know if there's any mathematical algorithmic way to quantify that type of a thing, but that would be another thing that I think would come up with the more popular creators who'd be like, "Hey, I'm not getting my full royalty because like there's something thrown in by so and so, but like it's clearly based on on Alex's work primarily, and then kind of everybody else." So I think that would wind up being another issue that would come up. And for me, getting back to your question about me being a publisher,
Mm-hmm.
that would probably stop me from wanting to opt in, because all I'm ever going to get are complaints,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like if I send that email out, even though it's not my system and it's run by this other thing, when they feel worked over or hosed or whatever, they're going to come to me, and that's not something that's going to be generating enough income in all likelihood to make it remotely worth the possible, like just handling the customer service aspect of it.
Right.
A, and then B, it's definitely not going to be worth it if my creators have bad feelings towards me as a publisher, and like that's what I publish stuff by creators. So having creators that are upset with me over something that didn't have to be, I probably would not be all that interested.
See, that makes sense. And it also brings up another issue that is along the same lines. Like, let's say, let's go with the Alex Ross example. There's a lot of artists who, or there may be a lot of artists whose style is similar to or an homage to an Alex Ross, who may not either may not ever get their name put into these search prompts, because one of the things about the search prompts that would be used to generate royalties for creators is the names of the creators have to be known. If I'm an artist and I just got out of school and I submit my stuff and my stuff may or may not look like Alex Ross's, I'm never going to get any money because no one knows who I am. So nobody puts my name in the search. So I, whether even if I see this as a good thing or a bad thing, I can't get anything going, because then it's my job to make sure enough people know who I am to use my name in the search in the first place so that then I get money, which means I'm not making art, I'm actually marketing my name to get more searches done. Does that make sense?
Sure does. Are you telling me that this is a system that would be designed intentionally or unintentionally to make the rich get richer and poor get poorer? Because that is an unheard of thing in our society.
Well, I am saying it would be designed to make the more popular people, whether they're rich or not. I mean, I don't know what these people's bank
Sure.
accounts are. The more popular and well-known people would be richer because they would buy you cannot use the name. As I say this, I think this is the right answer. You cannot use the style of a person that you have no idea about. So how are
Well,
you going to pay that person?
yeah, and then there's how you just created a workaround also, right? Let's say Alex Ross is like, no, I only want my original art to be my original art. I am not opting in.
Mm-hmm.
But all these people want AI generated Alex Ross art. And then they do a little bit of research to go, hey, here's some artists that are very similar to Alex Ross. They may not have everything Alex Ross has, but it's really
Mm-hmm.
similar. If we use their names, we generate something that looks a lot like it's based on Alex Ross, right? Then Alex Ross gets nothing because he's withheld his name. But people went and did a workaround to get as close to possible to Alex Ross as they could without using his name, which leads to this whole other sort of sub industry that then crops up of people who imitate popular artists in order to generate business. Now, look, some of that already happens without
Yes.
AI. I mean, you look at the image revolution, and you had 7 guys go and do their stuff, and it prompted all of these people to go, hey, I'm going to learn Jim Lee style, Mark Silvestri style, Rob Liefeld style. And in those cases, a lot of times those guys wound up hiring them, sort of understudies. They do, certain books, so it would maintain a certain look across, their line of comics. But that's a very different thing than what we're talking
Well, I think um what we've actually concluded is that you and I are not smart enough to actually figure this out. Which I
about. Well,
guess people probably knew before they started listening, but I think we confirmed it.
yeah, but I think what was interesting for me was as I was talking through coming at it from a publisher standpoint, I wasn't sure where I would land on that, and ultimately talked myself into landing like I wouldn't touch it, which I think is interesting. Just from we were getting to a point where I was like, well, maybe this could be ethical, if they can opt in, if they can do all that stuff, and then ultimately, once I started thinking of the pragmatic reality of what that would actually mean for me and my company, my publishing company, the risk, even if they're getting paid a royalty and they opted in, is still too high for other reasons.
Hmm.
And I didn't even talk about all the people who are so very vehemently and strongly opposed to AI that even if we allowed other people who wanted to opt in, that would probably cut me off from working with other creators who took a hardline stance.
Right.
Right. So again, the risk of what it would do to the overall business just would make it too high. Even if I was okay with it, I'm still not sure how I would feel about that personally. But yeah, when you just get to the pragmatic part of it, I think the risk is higher than I would want to deal with.
Hmm. Well, I think we're going to leave it right there because we're going to just have smarter people than us figure this out. However, um,
Greedier.
I want to let people know that the kind of working through all of these nuances and permutations and potential consequences is part of what we do both in our Discord and in our Q&A sessions and in our lessons for Comics Connection on a regular basis with a wide variety of topics, not just AI. In a lot of cases, we come up with much better answers. So if you want to actually check out all the stuff that we're doing inside of Comics Connection, there'll be a link in the show notes on how you can get 1 month free access. So, but until the next time, I'm Gamal. He's Andy. This has been the Comics Connection podcast, and have fun with your comics.